Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the conference. I know how difficult it can be to be on the Zoom sort of for a long amount of time. And thank you very much to the organizers of the conference, especially Mr. Eduardo Celeste, who's been absolutely wonderful during this time, and he has managed to make this happen. And also to the staff at the Caucasus International University, who've been extremely helpful. Anand, a personal thanks to you because you have been wonderful and so helpful, and a pleasure to work with in this period. So thank you very much. And to all the speakers. I'm going to share my presentation, which I hope you will find interesting. And okay. So first of all, as Mariam said, I will speak about the effects of online disinformation and fake news on a digital society in a fragile and unconsolidated democracy like Georgia. So the disinformation by UNESCO's Handbook of Journalism and Disinformation is defined as information that is false, and the person who's disseminating it knows that it is false. It is deliberate, intentional lie, and points to people being actively disinformed by malicious actors. According to the New York City University research between 2020 and 2021, disinformation on Facebook, on social media, gets 6 times more likes, shares, and interactions on the platform compared to posts from more reputable news sources. So disinformation is something that users like, and they are engaged with it. However, when we speak about disinformation, we always see the bigger picture in terms of the human rights debates and whether in any way sort of criminalizing or potentially, regulating disinformation could cause other problems such as, limiting freedom of speech, which could potentially turn into censorship. So that is the big debate. However, one should not forget that there are specific rights that are very much violated through disinformation. And by specific rights, I mean right to free and fair elections. For example, during the 2016 US presidential elections, the world has witnessed the micro-targeting and the targeted advertisements that reached and polarized the US society, digital society, and sort of disseminated disinformative messages inside the country that has led to, in a way, a surprising result. By that, I mean the presidential win of the former president, Donald Trump. So in a way, we can say that disinformation interferes with basic human rights of internet users, such as the right to free elections and also right to form an opinion, because right to form an opinion is also very much tangled with through disinformation. We are not provided an objective picture on Facebook. I'm talking Facebook because Facebook is the most actively used platform in Georgia. It's used by more than 75% of adult population. So the scope is quite big. So what I mean by micro-targeting is that the specific algorithms and the algorithmic discrimination does not allow us to see the full picture on our news feed. So it interferes with our right to form an objective opinion. This is especially dangerous in fragile democracies, which is the country where I'm speaking from, Georgia. It's certainly it's the most democratic country in this region, in the Caucasus, obviously, because we are bordering with Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, and Russia. So it's not very difficult to be democratic when you are compared to like Azerbaijan and Russia. But in big scope of things, it's still very much, it has a lot of problems. So for fragile democracies, it's particularly difficult when it comes to sort of disinformation and online disinformation. But on the other hand, if there were to be any laws, like something similar to Network Enforcement Act in Germany, which regulates hate speech, or something similar to the Act Against Manipulation of Information in France, which is something that regulates disinformation in pre-election stage, I think it would be, in a way, it would be useful. But on the other hand, I see risks of state censorship because this is not a consolidated democracy. So this is the reason why the civil sector stands very strongly in Georgia, and they act as vigilant watchdogs in order to avoid sort of any type of state censorship. And Georgia is more pro-American model when it comes to freedom of speech than it is pro-European model. And I mean disinformation code at the EU level. So my next slide is that it's about fact checking. The report from the UN report of the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, Ms. Irene Khan, she noted that fact-checking services are more limited in many parts of the world. A thorough understanding of the local political, social and economic context, language proficiency and close cooperation with civil society in countries where disinformation is more prevalent are necessary. So what I'm trying to explain is that the social media platforms have double standards. They have different types of standards when it comes to controlling disinformation in the US, and then they have different kind of standards when it comes to controlling disinformation outside the US. The same goes for fact checking. Even though a couple of Georgian civil sector organizations are part of the fact checking network, we still feel like the information that's going back to Facebook is at times quite selective. And the reason for that is because the fact-checking organizations that are part of the network, Facebook's third-party fact-checking network, they're headed by former government officials, so people who used to work at high positions in the government during the previous government, the Nationalist Party, and therefore at times they provide selective reports back to Facebook. So they report pages that are, that are pro-governmental, to say that it's operated by trolls and bots of the government, but they would never do the same on the opposing side, if I'm explaining myself correctly. So at times we feel that the fact-checking is not objective and not enough is done in that sense. Moving on to the inauthentic coordinated behavior, Georgia is no stranger to featuring in these reports. One of the reports where Georgia had a big role to play was in the April 2020 report, where Facebook said that it has deleted 511 pages, 111 profiles, 122 groups, and 56 Instagram accounts associated with S Persona, which is managed by an ex-journalist who is very much pro-government. And then on the opposing side, 23 profile accounts, 80 Facebook pages, 41 groups, and 9 Instagram accounts were deleted, who were operated by sort of trolls and bots and fake accounts of the supporters of the former governing party, so the Nationalist Party. But I guess it's not surprising that Georgia features in these reports. But also at times it's not clear what criteria the social media giant uses in order to determine whether a particular page is fake or real, because the decisions that Facebook makes, whether it's through content moderation through humans or content moderation through algorithms, it's not clear what criteria they employ in order to determine whether something is fake or real. And it's not transparent, and therefore there is a lack of accountability with Georgian public. So we can only guess why Facebook deleted a particular page because we don't see how the algorithm works. So moving on to the categories of online disinformation, during the period of 1st of September to 23rd of November 2020, 73 Facebook pages have been studied in Georgia, and 5,882 posts were published on these 73 pages, which had a user interaction, and by user interaction I mean shares, comments, and reactions of over 2.5 million sort of interactions. When you think about it, for a country that only sort of has like up to 4 million of civilians, people, that sort of number is quite big, over 2.5 million. That means that, they managed to interact with almost all layers of society. So they managed to penetrate through all layers through social media. And the 9 categories of disinformation that we see, sort of what kind of narratives is number one in terms of the most disseminated one is nationalistic narratives. And then we see anti-liberal narratives at 19%. Then we see anti-Western narratives at 11%, homophobic at 9%, conspirative, mainly connected to COVID-19 at 7%, xenophobic at 6%, and Islamophobic at 3%. So I think you will find interesting to see what kind of narratives we're looking at. So there is this page on Facebook that's called Turkey is, Turkey is a conqueror, and it spreads Turkophobic messages, which is like something like Turkey is an occupier. And then we have Islamophobic messages like Georgia is under risk of Islam replacing Orthodox Church. And then we have pages that are trying to make us lose the faith in our strategic partners in the US and in NATO, namely. So we have things like Georgia's strategic partners are not assisting Georgia, but actually they're using it to further their own interests. NATO is using Georgia against Russia. COVID-19 was born in Lugar Lab, when in fact Lugar Lab has been one of the key success stories of global pandemic. And being a member of LGBT community means you are not Christian and you are not loved by God. So this is the kind of things that we encounter. These are the names of the groups that are very much likely to spread disinformation. So We Love Our Motherland, National Front of Georgia. They support aggressive right-wing party Georgian March. And Georgian March is a very aggressive party that tends to be sort of always tends to be initiator of aggression when it comes to demonstrations against LGBT community and against minority groups. And, on many occasions, we have witnessed involvement of Georgian March in a few violent actions. And then we have anti-liberal doctrine and republic supporting one of the most pro-Russian parties in Georgian parliament, which is Alliance of Patriots of Georgia. And of course, Alt-Info and Alpha Dominance, who criticized Georgian parliament for adopting gender quotas as part of the electoral reform. So I guess what this points towards is that what Facebook is missing, and again, I'm speaking about Facebook because it's the most actively used platform in this country. I guess where we see failures is in content moderation system. So the way they moderate content, it's missing the local context. And this is probably determined by a number of factors. It's determined by the algorithms that at times fail to remove disinformation, and at times they overregulate. And according to the research that I conducted for this article, I spoke to several representatives of Georgian fact-checking organizations, and they told me in qualitative interviews that I conducted that individual comments, when a particular comment is made on Facebook, it doesn't matter how harmful the individual comment is, they almost never get deleted. So even if it contains hate speech, or even if it contains disinformation, or it defames someone, or ruins someone's reputation, and you report it, individual comments always the response from Facebook always seems to be that this is not hate speech, this is not disinformation, and this is okay with our community standards. It's only when it seems to be like a group coordinated activity that it will get the attention from the social media providers. So it needs to fall under the inauthentic coordinated behavior, and it needs to be like a scheme of fake news in order to gain the attention that it needs. But also it's worth mentioning that we also have few examples of what is claimed to be an overregulation. For example, there was this group, MedGuide, which was followed by more than 100,000 subscribers, I believe, and apparently this group was helping people assisting them during the pandemic. So with the advice that the doctors were sharing and etc. And then this group got deleted twice by Facebook, and the administrators of the group have been sort of wondering whether the reason is because it was COVID-19 related, and Facebook is particularly sensitive to COVID-19 related sort of groups, or whether it's because it got misreported, or whether it was accused of spreading disinformation. But the accountability system is not working, because even though the group got deleted twice, there is no answer, and there is no criteria to determine what Facebook used in order to make the decision. So at the moment, we are witnessing a moment of change. As Eduardo Celeste, in his articles, he calls it the constitutional moment, because everything is changing due to technological advances. I mean, nothing can stay the same because the world around us is changing so much. And we have an option of sort of state regulation, which we see in strong democratic states. And then we have an option of self-regulation that we see in the form of Facebook's oversight board or social media councils. And then the third option is basically doing nothing and just, leaving everything as it is, or giving the power to platforms, I guess. But the erosion of state sovereignty is caused by a number of factors. Number one is obviously what Mr. Giordanato spoke about, which is lack of technical knowledge. Judiciary and the legislators, especially in our country, they are not prepared to legislate and to adjudicate on matters involving social media. So it's automatic, it's left to Facebook. And then incapability of control, because it's become such a big sort of, if you talk numbers, it's probably the biggest country in the world with 3 billion sort of users. So it's really difficult to control a huge global corporate entity like that. And also we are witnessing collapse of public-private distinction. What used to be an entirely private organization now is a semi-public organization, because the way it acts and the way it affects the human rights of the users, that points to the fact that it has lost its private immunity that it had originally. And then it's difficult because we live in a globalized world, and the borders are not as clear when it comes to internet. And what's very important is that we have even if Georgian court makes a decision about a particular case involving Facebook, there is no enforcement mechanism, because it's really difficult for smaller countries to enforce their decisions and to execute their decisions and implement it when it comes to like a global corporate governance. And obviously, outdated legal instruments are not equipped to deal with things like disinformation, content visibility, algorithmic discrimination. Traditional constitutional framework is just out of date, and it's not designed to understand the technological advances. Finally, the recommendations that I would give at this stage is obviously media literacy. The education seems to be the answer. And Georgia seems to be taking steps in this regard, but this is not enough, because media literacy can't be just sort of here and there. It has to be a consistent, long-term objective, and it needs to be incorporated in curricula across all ages, all age groups, and all educational settings. And it's something that, we may see the results of media literacy in 10 years from now, but it's not a quick fix to these problems. And then we have decentralization of content moderation. Unless the social media platforms understand what's going on in individual countries, they will always make uninformed decisions on content. So they need to understand the local context, which can happen through more involvement of fact-checking organizations, or it can happen through setting up, what Mr. Giordanato said was a potential judiciary body or a council, which would involve different members of society. And this would allow us to sort of establish a working relationship with social media councils. And hopefully it will allow us to execute the decisions made in Georgia, sort of in Facebook, which is at the moment a very sort of very distant and remote perspective. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope I've summarized the problems that my country is facing at present. Thank you very much for attention, and I'm happy to take the questions at the end.